was so impressed.
Good morning and welcome. We have winter. There's probably different feelings about that. I'll start by reminding you and letting those of you who are new here know that if you want them, we have listening devices available at the rear of the sanctuary, and an usher can help you with that, as well as with a large print hymnal. We gather this morning, some of us via the internet, hello, and some of us here in the sanctuary in Endokina, now known as Portsmouth, the unceded ancestral lands of the Abenaki people. And I'm glad you're here, however it is that you are joining us. If you are feeling strong or fragile this morning, if you've exercised vigorously before you got here or could barely get your creaking bones out of bed, whether you are a theist, atheist, pagan, or none of the above, and whoever you love and whatever brought you here today, you are welcome. And I hope that you find a sense of belonging here in this covenantal community. My name is Myra Aaronson, and I am one of a team of worship associates who have the honor of working with our minister, the Reverend Ellen Quadras, our director of Lifespan Ministries, Kirsten Hunter, and all the rest of our wonderful staff, some of whom you see, some of whom are behind the scenes, bringing worship services to you each week. And sometimes that collaboration involves a guest, as today. In our pulpit today is the Reverend Tess Baumberger. Tess is an ordained UU minister, a poet, and a writer. She has served congregations in New Hampshire and Massachusetts in the past and is currently working as a hospice chaplain in Northeast Massachusetts. Welcome. The gift of music today comes to us from our pianist, Susan Adams, and the invocation will come from Cathy Okhuysen. The time for all ages will be offered by Reverend Tess, and following that, the children will go downstairs to their classes. If you would like to socialize after the service, we'll be having our usual fellowship time with coffee and tea and always some wonderful munchies. And one more thing, if you have not already done so, this would be a good time for you to silence your phones or other electronic devices that might ring, beep, clang, chime, or make any other sounds during this time of worship. I will check my own as well. And now, announcements.
Good morning. I have a few announcements, the first two of which are in your order of service, and I'm just going to read them out loud so we all make sure that we receive these important messages. First one, on April 30th at 3 p.m., please join us for the joyous and historic occasion in the life of our congregation. Reverend Ellen and Kirsten will have an installation for Reverend Ellen and Kirsten. They will be entering into a covenantal relationship with us and as co-leaders of our spiritual community with each other. This installation will affirm these covenants and our congregational commitment to a collaborative leadership model that enables this shared ministry. This service of installation will center on spoken rituals that lift up these covenants. Mark your calendars for April 30th at 3 p.m. and stay tuned for more information. Next, volunteer for the Pocket Garden Tour. Sign-ups for the Pocket Garden Tour will be on Sunday, March 26th at 9 a.m. in the Piscataqua room, which is the room closest to the kitchen. 2023's Pocket Garden Tour is September 8th and 9th in Lafayette Park neighborhood. Many volunteers are needed, including garden hosts, ticket sales, and will call during the tour, helpers at an after party, and a variety of other jobs before and during the event itself. This is our biggest fundraiser for the church, but it's also our way to give back to the larger community and have fun. So please email Robin Schnell if you aren't able to attend or would like more information, and Robin's email address is in the order of service. Also, if you filled out a paper shared plate ballot last week, so if you voted for shared plate last week on a paper ballot, we accidentally gave you the wrong ballot. So please, if you voted last week, or if you want to vote, see Jen Leiden back at the tech station back there, and she'll give you a new one so that we can complete those for you. And my last announcement is one that I'm especially excited about. We are about to reopen the nursery finally. Woohoo! For all our tiniest babies and toddlers. And I would love to have Susan and Maisie come up as our nursery team. These will be our regular nursery magicians. They're creating the magic and setting up that space. We will open that nursery next week for the first time, and it will be open every Sunday for children 3 and under. And yeah, that's it. Oh, the last thing about that is if we could use a couple more volunteers to help support that room. So if you're interested in playing with babies and toddlers about once a month maybe, then let me know, and I'd love to talk with you about that. Thank you.
Good morning. Whoa. My name is not Myra, but I am a member of a team of worship associates that have the honor of, and I think you know all of that. So part of what we all started last week was sharing testimonials about service here in the community. And I came today to share from this piece of the worship associates. You know, I often wonder what goes on in creating a worship, right? We have a nice little order of service, and our staff does wonderful things in putting things together. And how many of you actually think about the service in any way other than, oh, I'm going to the church to see the sermon or the music? How many of you notice when something's missing? Or someone like me is coming up here and just winging it and hoping to God I don't sound bad. Well, this is what we do, right? So I first started either in the pulpit or, what are we calling it now, the lectern? The lectern, but basically in front of audiences in a congregation, gosh, in the late 90s, sometime years ago, when I had a conversation with Reverend Thomas Michelson, the minister of the First Parish in Cambridge, Unitarian Universalist. And I had been a UU for about a year at that point. I'd come back from GA, and he was checking in. How was things? What was my experience? And having just been at GA, I made an offhand comment about what I like to call the steel wire brush of Unitarian Universalism, as a way of saying, oh gosh, we scrape so much off. Are we losing value and challenging our intellectual and spiritual lives? And he just goes, oh, that's a good sermon title. Pops open his book, writes it down, and says, you're going to have August 29th. Does that work for you? I said, what? I had forgotten that it was a teaching congregation, and Thomas really enjoyed finding the adults in the community and sort of kicking them up the path to potential divinity. And while Div School didn't catch, what did was the thought of personal and self-exploration, right? And the thought of being able to do that publicly and openly and have a conversation with people in group, more than just small group ministry, but sharing my own reflections and thoughts. It's a space for vulnerability. It's a space for self-consideration. And that's the other nice thing is, because we follow Soul Matters, I know this month's theme is vulnerability, and I intentionally drop it in. But that's what we do, right? We have an opportunity to help make connections. Another minister and I, a good friend and I, had talked one afternoon, and after much consideration, we realized that most of us only have 2 or 3 topics that we ever preach about. Everything after that's just variations on a theme. And of course, one of mine, if you haven't already guessed, is usually on transformation, change, and personal growth. I mean, why not, right? I've only changed a little bit over the past few years. Those in the know. But that's what we get to do here. And that's part of what Worship Associates does, is getting an opportunity with intention to sit down every month with our minister, with the worship team, and actually discuss the changes that we want to see. Sometimes it's the mechanics of the service. Exactly how many minutes and seconds does it take to go through lighting the candles? Trust me, we count. We know. Or what would be the riots caused if we changed something in the service? And how much fun might that be? Because I'm usually the chaos person. I like to throw in new things. But always it comes back to a consideration of what's the value, meaning, and opportunity for us to be able to explore as individuals and as a community. And so if any part of this sounds interesting to you, I invite you to consider Worship Associates. It's a wonderful team, and the tattoos are fairly painless. Thank you very much.
Cozy Revaya, Cozy Revaya, Cozy Revaya, Cozy
If you are watching us remotely, I invite you to light your own candle while we light the candle in the sanctuary. As we embark on this path of vulnerability in March, we light the chalice with these words from the Reverend Telos Whitfield. With the kindling of our flame, we recognize the fragility of life and our own vulnerability as we navigate challenges that always seem to come. May this light remind us of the strength we possess as individuals and collectively as a community to lean into and respond, finding our way forward together. Now please stand as you are able and join me in reciting our mission statement, which is in your order of service and on your screen. At South Church, we nurture spiritual growth through worship, learning, and community. We celebrate the worth and dignity of all people, and we inspire one another to act on our faith in the larger community. Thank you. So today we begin to explore our monthly theme of vulnerability. So I looked up what the dictionary had to say about that word and found two major meanings. One, openness or susceptibility to attack or harm. That's exactly how I felt last Sunday afternoon when I attended the community gathering for love at Temple Israel, just down the street. This event was a response to the hateful graffiti that had appeared in Portsmouth 2 weeks ago. I was nervous about going, but I went. I am Jewish, and while that doesn't show on the surface, it makes me a member of a targeted group. I have loved ones who are members of other targeted groups. The whole time I was there, I felt vulnerable. It felt dangerous. The temple was packed with people, which was wonderful. But I feared that any one of them could have been there with bad intentions, could have been violent, intent on harming. Maybe the hate is due to their fear, and that fear is rooted in feeling vulnerable, threatened. It occurred to me later, it's like a spiral. Our vulnerabilities winding around each other, getting bigger and bigger. I have felt this physical vulnerability at other times, as a woman walking down the street alone, or getting into my car in a dark place at night, or having the right to make decisions about my own body taken away. No matter how much courage I have, there are situations I can't control. And there's another definition of vulnerability too, not physical, but emotional. The willingness to allow one's weaknesses to be seen, to risk being emotionally hurt. And this kind of vulnerability, maybe we have more control over that. We can choose whether to expose ourselves, whether to take off our metaphorical or psychological masks to show who we really are. These masks that we all wear sometimes can give us a feeling of safety, but they also create a separation. When I think about the friends I feel the closest to, I recognize that they are people with whom I went through a difficult experience, or those I allowed to witness one of my personal struggles, or who let me see them and be there for them at a time they were feeling overwhelmed, scared, or just able to admit that they were nervous about something. When we accept the vulnerability of telling our truths, we are open to growth and are role models for others. I love the freedom to be my real self that aging brings. It's one of the great benefits. And if I am able to laugh at my own mistakes and foibles in a healthy, not denigrating way, it is easier for me to be vulnerable. Life is too short to spend it hiding. Parker Palmer says, live as if you liked yourself. Live as if you liked yourself. I say, let's covenant with ourselves and with each other and try that. Now please join me in singing hymn number 214, Shabbat Shalom. Shalom. Cathy will give us some guidance about how we're going to do that.
So 214 You may not need the hymnal once you've taken a quick look at it. We'll just sing the first 3 lines so you can get the idea of how it goes. And then when we sing it all together, you'll notice that there's some repeats. So the first section repeats, the middle section repeats, the last, and we'll do it through twice. But for now, let's just do the first 3 lines. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. And the third line. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom.
All right. So that is a song that's usually sung on the Sabbath in Jewish families and is a really fun song. Tomorrow night begins the Jewish feast of Purim, which is an ancient ritual, ancient festival based on an ancient story. And today, during the children's time, we're going to act that story out. I'm going to tell the story, and then we need some volunteers to come out up and act things out. So we have volunteers already? Yes. So our story takes place during the reign of King Ahasuerus, a very silly king who partied too much. There's my king. Hi. So this is our king. And then we have a couple other characters. We have Mordecai, who is a very wise man, upstanding man. As you can see right here. Mordecai, thank you. And then we have 2 characters that need your help, and we'll have people to prompt you to do this. So we have our queen named Esther. And whenever you hear Esther's name, you're supposed to say, yay. So we cheer for Esther. And then, of course, we have to have a bad guy, and that's Haman. You're going to be Haman. Whenever you hear Haman's name, you're going to say, boo, or make noise, okay? This is going to be fun. So are you ready? So I'm just going to ask you guys to act out the story as I'm telling it. So in the palace one day, King Ahasuerus decided that his queen Vashti was too sassy for him. So he decided to hold a contest to find a new queen. In the king's village was a Jewish man named Mordecai, who was on one of the king's scribes, which meant he copied things out. Anything that was going to be sent out, they didn't have email or texting or anything like that in those days. So he was a scribe, and he told his beautiful cousin Esther, he was kind of like a dad to Esther. Yay, Esther, woo! Esther, that she should go, apply to be the queen. So she does. Indeed, yes, Esther was so beautiful that the king chose her to be the queen. Very nice. Okay, so one day, shortly after Esther had started, Mordecai heard two of the king's guards. So Mordecai hears two of the king's guards plotting to overthrow the king. So he tells Esther, yay! Esther tells the king, yay! And saves the king's life. Okay. Mordecai too. Yay! All right. Now, the king's advisor was a mean, nasty man named Haman. Boo! Okay. He made the Persians bow down to him whenever he was walking around. And Haman didn't like Mordecai because Mordecai refused to bow down to him. So in a sneaky way, Haman did a really bad thing. Haman, boo, did a really bad thing. He got the king's permission to send out a notice saying all the Jews in the Persian Empire, which went from northern Africa all the way to India, what's now India, were to be killed on a certain day. And he decided this day by casting lots, or called pur. So Haman, like super evil, right? Okay, so Mordecai finds out about this. And so he sends a message to Queen Esther saying, you really need to do something about this, okay? Now, meanwhile, the king has remembered that he was supposed to honor Mordecai, right? So he calls Haman in, and he says to Haman, how should I honor someone who has served me? And the king said, and Haman thinks that, right, you're good. Haman thinks that it's talking about him, so he says, well, you should put this person on your finest horse and clothe him in your finest robes and walk him through the city and have a person go in front of him and say, this is a man honored by the king. And so the king says, okay, you should do that for Mordecai. Oh, Haman was really upset by this, but he had to do it. He had to actually, you can have Mordecai and Haman going around through the city, and Haman's bumming, isn't he? Boo, Haman, yay, Mordecai. All right. So anyhow, Mordecai finds out about the plot, and he says, okay, so Esther, you need to do something about this. Yay, Esther, yay, Esther. And Esther says, but, Esther, yay. Esther says, oh, I can't even go see the king without an invitation. Otherwise, I could be killed. And he says, Esther, yay! Esther, yay! You may have been made queen for just such a time as this. So Esther thinks about it, and she decides to do this. So Esther decides to have 2 royal banquets, and she invites the king and Haman to these banquets, okay? And finally, she has enough courage to tell the king that Haman has this plot to kill all the Jews. And the king gets really, really mad and has Haman punished. Oh. And Mordecai actually becomes the king's new second in command, and Esther has saved the day. Yay! Thank you for all of our actors today. So now today, 2,500 years later, the Feast of Purim, this story is told every Purim. People dress up in costumes, they act silly, they have fun, they boo at Haman, yeah. They cheer for Esther, and they celebrate just a fun holiday of mix-upness. So thank you so much again for participating. We're now going to sing the kids to their classes.
Each week at the Offertory, we combine our resources to support South Church, the building, the staff, the congregants, and the greater community. In support of the greater community, this month the collection will be shared with Women Aid of Greater Portsmouth. This organization provides short-term financial assistance to neighbors in need of all genders when they have nowhere else to turn for household and utility expenses, childcare, grocery, healthcare, transportation. Women Aid steps in when a community validator, someone working with the individual or family, can verify their need and eligibility and makes a request on behalf of this person in need. You can donate in many ways. You can use our mobile app, Vanco. You can give via the donate link on our website, or by sending a check in the mail to our office at 73 Court Street in Portsmouth. And of course, you can use the collection plate, which will be passed momentarily. The offering will now be gratefully received in the words of Reverend Kayla Parker, "May we give in love and in hope."
I now invite you to enter into a time of meditation and prayer. It's been quite a week. On top of weather events and everything else, there have been some stories in the news that may have some of us feeling especially vulnerable today. So I ask us to hold intention for all of the people in our world who are frightened right now, who are suffering, as I say this prayer. Prayer for the stressed and weary. I wrote it a few years ago. For all among us who are stressed, anxious, worried, or weary, we pray. O precious one, as we breathe in deeply together, may your kind air fill the hard places within. And as we breathe out slowly, may those places soften, widen. As we inhale gently once more, may peaceful oxygen untangle the tangled places, loosening any knots we find in our muscles, our stomachs, our hearts, so that when we release our breaths, we let go of stress and tension. If tears are there, let them come. This is a place where we can fall apart and know that others will hold us gently as we put ourselves together once more. As we mingle our breaths in this, our safe and sacred place, may our fears disperse. May our frayed nerves knit together once more. May we realize that worry wastes creative energy. May we choose to put that power to better, more positive uses. O source that flows through all things, open the closed places within us now. Remove all impediments to love and calm, that you may flow serenely through us. May we dance in the rhythm of your grace, to the music and the rhythm of our hearts. So may it be. Amen, and blessed be. You're invited now to come forward and light, we'll have a minute of silence and take a pause, and then you're invited to come forward to light candles of joy and concern. We ask, I guess your practice is to come up the side aisles to do that and to go back down through the center aisles. We find that taking time to acknowledge our sorrows and joys brings us release and support, strength and joy. So please take a moment and reflect on a joy or concern you're holding. If it's something you want us to know about, we invite you to write your concern on the pastoral care blue card in the pew. When you come up to the table to light your candle, you can place your concern in the basket and we'll be in touch with you. And if you would like your prayer concern named aloud during the service, please be in touch with Reverend Ellen by Friday, or write your concern down and hand it to us during the service. Let's take a moment and then invite you to come forward. Thank you. That was beautiful. So first of all, thank you for having me here today. It was a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was a pleasure to share the Purim story with you earlier. I'm going to pivot a little bit. We were having fun, but now this is a more serious look at this ancient story. I want to look at it and step through it a little bit, looking at it through some more contemporary lenses. So the first lens is the lens of anti-racism, which is something that takes up a lot of my mind space and heart space and soul space these days. The call to dismantle racism has risen again in Unitarian Universalism, and this time we really need to meet the challenge. The time is now, and I think the Purim story can help us with that because it has some lessons to teach us about resisting oppression. The second lens through which I'm seeing this story is the work of Brene Brown. Last month, when I was telling a friend I planned to preach on vulnerability and courage today, he recommended that I look at her work. I had never really encountered it before, and I've really enjoyed listening to her. I listen to audiobooks on tape when I'm driving around in between seeing my hospice patients. And I think it casts some interesting light both on the Purim story and on anti-racism. However, I am aware that Brene Brown, because she speaks and writes from a white woman's perspective, sometimes her work doesn't work so well for people of color. She and her friend Tarana Burke, who helped found the Me Too movement, talked about this a few years ago, and they put together a book of essays written by Black people about these same topics that Brene Brown studies, which are shame, vulnerability, courage, and resilience. So it's a good book. It's called You Are Your Own Best Thing. And I am going to read actually from an essay in that book shortly. The other thing I want to tell you before we get started looking at the story is that 20 years ago when I was in seminary, I took a class that has shaped my approach to racism and oppression. The class was called Lying and Oppression, and it drew on the work of a theologian named Cicely Bach, who postulates that different types of oppression, and she looks at political oppression, racism, and poverty, are based on systems of lies. And that made sense to me because at the time I was volunteering as a chaplain in a homeless shelter, and I was encountering all the lies that people tell about homeless people. Fast forward to the last few weeks as I've been listening to the work of Brene Brown. In one of her books, she makes a distinction between lying and BS. Liars, she says, know there's something called the truth, they just choose not to tell it. BSers, on the other hand, deny that there's anything like the truth or science or anything like that. So I love this distinction, and though I doubt that Cicely Bach would be willing to rename her classic book BS and Oppression, I don't think the word lie is a strong enough word for the untruths that underlie oppression. I think it's BS. Can we agree that racism is based on BS? Yeah, I think so. So that's where I'm coming from, and I want to look at this story of Queen Esther through these lenses. Now, the Purim story, as we said earlier, was set 2,500 years ago during the Persian Empire. And again, that was the largest empire the world had ever seen to that point. It stretched from western northern Africa all the way to what is now India. So Esther and Mordecai are members of a conquered people, and as such, they were in a vulnerable position. I've been thinking that you could define oppression as happening when one group of people deliberately makes another group of people vulnerable, usually by the use of some kind of force, in this case, military force. Now, Esther is even more vulnerable than Mordecai because not only is she a member of a conquered people, but she's also a female-identified person living in a patriarchal society. Today, we might say that she has an intersectional identity. We're sadly still familiar with the lie that people born in male bodies are inherently superior to those born in female bodies, and again, the word lie is not strong enough. Patriarchy is also BS. Because of the BS of patriarchy at the start of the book of Esther, she's defined in terms of her male relative, not on her own terms. She has to obey her male relative, And she has to show up to present herself as a potential queen, because if she didn't, she could be killed. So she has no choice in the matter. She is chosen to be queen, but this is not a consensual relationship. However, it is the first main turning point in the story. The next major turning point happens when Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman. And there's more to this than meets the eye. At that time in the Persian Empire, most of the people that they had conquered worshipped multiple gods. Now, conquering nations at that time would insist that the people they conquered worship their gods. If you already worship multiple gods, this was really not so much a big problem. You would just add the empire's gods to your own gods. No harm, no foul. Your gods become my gods. But it was a big deal to the Jewish people, because not only did they believe there was just one God, they believed their God was the one true God. So I think Mordecai refusing to bow down to Haman is symbolic of the Jewish people refusing to worship the gods of the people who conquered them. By doing this, by refusing to bow down to anyone but his God, Mordecai is representing his people, but he is also showing up as authentically himself. And this is what Brene Brown says is the definition of vulnerability, showing up as who we authentically are. She says vulnerability looks like truth and feels like courage. This is a courageous act. And how does Haman respond? In such a cowardly way, with a decree of genocide, which is horrifying on the one hand and outlandish and ridiculous on the other. Can you imagine a person with that much power having such a fragile ego? Wait, don't answer that. So looking at Haman's reaction through the lens of Brene Brown's work, to me, it looks like a shame response. So that's one of the topics she studies is shame. And she says when people feel shame, they tend to do one of two things. They either shut down or they lash out violently. So you can see that in his reaction and in the reactions of some white supremacists, right? There might be hatred and anger and fear in there, but I think there's also some shame. Calling someone a racist certainly elicits a shame response. No matter how dedicated they are to racist ideas and laws and policies, no one wants to be called a racist because it indicates that there is something inherently wrong with them. That's the message of the feeling of shame, that there's something that you're flawed and wrong and unworthy. So for whatever reasons he does it, after Haman's violent reaction, Mordecai finds out about it because he's a scribe. He's copying out this order of genocide. And he sends Esther a message saying, you got to do something about it. She responds with a message saying, well, I could be put to death if I go see the king without an invitation. And he responds by saying, I picture this messenger running back and forth between them. He responds by saying, you know, you have to do this. Maybe you were made queen for just such a moment of this. Excuse me, let me get a little drink. Then, as now, oppressed people need to know the laws and the norms and the culture of the people who oppress them, and Esther has to know this stuff about the court. Anyhow, the other thing I wanted to say about this is Mordecai is asking Esther to make herself even more vulnerable than she already is by admitting that she's Jewish. If you think about it today, white people, in order to fight racism, have to make ourselves vulnerable. We could just stay in the background and do nothing, right? We have that option. But we have to stand up and be counting. But because white culture teaches us that vulnerability equals weakness, we tend to avoid it at all costs. And we avoid being uncomfortable. We just don't like it. But we have to do so. As Unitarian Universalists, we have to do so. We have something that in big seminary words we call the prophetic imperative. We are called to do this work, no matter how much we hate being vulnerable, how much we hate dealing with discomfort. We who are white must stand with our siblings of color. And to do that, we have to make ourselves vulnerable like Esther does. So Mordecai is asking something of Esther, but he also points out that she has some power. He says she may have come to this moment as queen because of this. She might have been made queen because of this. And pointing out her power causes a shift in their relationship. And I want to read from the book of Esther, see if you can find that shift. Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. After that I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. See that shift? Who's calling the shots now? So I think this shows that even people who seem to be powerless do have some power, and when they claim that power, things can change. I'd also like to point out that Esther asks her community for spiritual support. That's what fasting is. It's a spiritual practice that gives support. And if we're going to fight white supremacy, we're going to need the spiritual support of our communities as well, right? To me, that was one of the hallmarks of the civil rights movement, the enormous role that the churches played. So from there, the Purim story unfolds quite rapidly, and it reveals that Esther is smart and strategic, as we will need to be to fight white supremacy. She uses the power of her beauty. She dolls herself up before she goes to see the king, and she must have looked pretty good for him to offer her up to half his kingdom, which he does. She doesn't take him up on that offer because she knows that would leave Haman still in power, and he's dangerous. Instead, she has these 2 banquets for the king and for her enemy, Haman. These kind of massage Haman's fragile ego and lulls him into a sense of false security. And they also strengthen the king's connection to her. Esther knows this guy. She knows that he tends to make rash decisions based on feelings. He has some, shall we say, impulse control problems. Anyway, she knows she's in a strong position. And when she knows that, she reveals Haman's plot. And then she argues that killing all the Jews would be a bad idea for the king financially, showing she's more than just a pretty face. She's a smart cookie. And then she reveals this plot, and it turns out that Haman has been plotting her demise, the beloved queen of the king. So the king reacts just as Esther had expected, impulsively and with great anger, maybe even some shame. He has Haman executed, actually, in the story, and he takes all his belongings and gives them to Mordecai, makes Mordecai his second in command. They issue this new decree saying that the Jewish people can defend themselves, and Esther has saved the day. Through a combination of the power of her position, her vulnerability, her courage, spiritual support, intelligence, and savvy, she saves her people. You could see why this story has encouraged generations of people, Jewish and not Jewish, to strive against oppression for their survival. Not just this story from the Jewish tradition, but also the story of Passover, which was so important to enslaved people, and the story of Hanukkah. There's a joke that you can summarize most of the Jewish stories as, they tried to wipe us out, they couldn't, let's eat. Because there's always good food, right? At Purim, there are these little triangular pastries or cookies called hamantaschen. They're delicious. Anyway, that joke brings us back to the fun we were having earlier in the service, right? I find it so fascinating that this story, which is not a funny story, it's a deadly, serious story, sits at the center of a holiday that's all about laughter, about turning everything upside down, about making fun of everyone. There's nothing and no one is sacred on Purim. Rabbis make fun of themselves. They give silly invocations and silly benedictions. Kids dress up in costumes and they play practical jokes. It's like a combination of Halloween and April Fool's Day. All this based on this deadly serious story. It's maybe a little strange and maybe a little wonderful. I think there's wisdom to it, though. I think the wisdom is that when you laugh at someone, it takes some of the power away from you, the power away from them, right? It takes away the power of fear that oppressors use to oppress people. So I think that there is there is wisdom in the folly of Purim. And that makes me wonder if there isn't a role for laughter in the work of anti-racism. To this point, let me read now from that book I mentioned earlier, the one that's edited by Tarana Burke and Brene Brown, called You Are Your Best Thing. The excerpt is from an essay titled This Joy I Have by the writer and activist Austin Channing Brown. She writes, we, speaking on behalf Black community, we have learned that the only thing white supremacy would love more than taking our lives is for the lives we have to be diminished, less human, filled with despair, containing only fear. But our community has learned that even the darkest depths of human evil cannot snuff out our experience of joy, of laughter and love, of good food and good conversation, of family legacy and hope for the future, of creative endeavor and pursuit of justice. The joy of Blackness persists. I think what she's describing here is not only resistance to racism, but also it seems similar to what Brene Brown talks about as shame resilience. And I think we need to have those same tools because shame is all bound up in white supremacy, right? The tools she talks about are connection, compassion, and courage. They're all tools that we have here. It's not just oppressed people who feel shame due to white supremacy, and that's, to me, one of the most terrible things, that they feel ashamed of who they are and how they are. But white people feel shame too, at least some of us do. I do. I don't know about you. But I feel that shame, even though I know it's not a helpful feeling, even though I know it either shuts us down or makes us lash out. The thing about shame is it tells us that we're unworthy, that we're flawed, that we're inherently bad, and you know what? That's BS. Saying anyone is inherently flawed or fallen or evil is BS. Our first Unitarian Universalist principle affirms that we all have inherent worth and dignity, and that is a belief that goes way back in our faith. It's grounded on our religious ancestors' rejection of the idea of original sin. Both the Unitarians and the Universalists, there were two religions that merged in 1961. They go back 200 years in our nation. Both of them rejected this notion that people are inherently bad or fallen, that humanity is bad. They rejected shame, but that doesn't let us off the hook. We can't just say, oh, we don't do shame around here, we're done. No, because they also said that we have this prophetic imperative to make the world a place where every person can realize the potential for goodness that we are born with. And this has to be a world of justice and equity. There's no room for racism or the other isms in it. We have to fight this. We must. And we have the tools to fight it. We have compassion, we have courage, we have connection here. We have a belief in each person's inherent worth and dignity, which to me is a theological superpower of Unitarian Universalism. And I think we can use laughter as well, not to avoid the discomfort and the vulnerability and the accountability that we have to do with this work, no. But we can use laughter to fight shame and to dispel fear, to take away some of the power of the oppression. Laughter, especially laughing together, builds joy. Laughter can strengthen connections between people. Laughter can be an act of resistance and courage. Laughter can inspire compassion for ourselves and for one another. Plus, laughter is pleasurable. The activist, organizer, writer, blogger, singer, Adrienne Marie Brown, generally awesome person, says, pleasure is a measure of freedom. I love that. Pleasure is a measure of freedom. She says activism should be pleasurable. And again, that suggests to me there may be a role for laughter in this work. We need some joy to balance the heaviness, to counteract the fear, to build our resilience. So maybe someday in a service like this one, we'll be telling the story of fighting white supremacy, with people haranguing for heroic words and deeds and people, and booing committed white supremacists and their ideas and laws and policies. I could get behind booing voter suppression laws, for one example. That service would include laughing not just at the silly ideas other people have, but at our own silly ideas, so they don't harden into BS that oppresses somebody else. Laughter can loosen us up when we need loosening. It can draw us closer together when we need community. It can help us build courage and resilience that we will need for this fight. Laughter is a pleasure that can give us a measure of the freedom we have already attained and loosen us up to have a vision of the freedom we can have in the future. So may it be. Our closing is number 368 in the hymnal. Now let us sing. So this hymn has a low part and a high part. Sing whichever part you like. And let's sing as if nobody's listening. Let's just belt it out. This is a fun hymn. Let's really give it all we got.
So we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
For our benediction, these words from the Jewish scriptures from Isaiah. For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountain and the hills before you shall burst into song, and the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Go in faith, go in hope, go in trust, go in joy. Blessed be. Amen.